Good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Augustine himself described his De civitate Dei as a magnum opus et arduum, voluminous and difficult to write. Not only the size of this volume is awe-inspiring, its form, style, content and method, transmission history and intellectual reception are dynamic, multi-layered, extremely complex and anything but unambiguous, as the last 3 days have shown. No reading material for the nightstand or by the pool. For this reason, I will brighten up my modest conclusions with a few images to keep your attention in a didactic way. I will reveal local masterpieces from the Low Countries. Very appropriately, Dr. Gianni handpicked as the poster picture of our conference this beautiful late 15th century Flemish illumination. Peter Brown wrote that De civitate Dei should never be viewed as a static, complete picture of Augustine's thinking. It reads like a film of a professional boxing championship, all movement, ducking and dodging. Augustine fights like a professional boxer and with style. He rarely relies on the knockout. He is out to win the fight on points. It is a battle of attrition fought in 22 books against nothing less than the entire pagan literary culture available to him. We have fought that depleting battle at this conference and we have scored important points in 3 rounds. The intellectual network of which De civitate Dei is the fruit and in which it blossomed for centuries, the challenging transmission history of its text, and the study of its intriguing content. Sources and reception. Since COVID unfortunately prevented us from meeting at the Royal Library in Brussels as we originally planned, I'm pleased to show you this wonderful gem, which immediately illustrates our first boxing round. Augustine both as a pupil and as a teacher, a myriad network of influences, of first sources and second readers. First, the antecedents. This canonized book did not appear out of thin air. Given its content, Cicero's auctoritas is beyond dispute. De civitate Dei plays a nuanced revitalization and original Christian appropriation of the Sallustian and Ciceronian understanding of history and de res publica. Augustine agrees with Cicero that the sole basis for the commonwealth is true justice. However, they do not agree on the source and nature of this perfect justice. We observed a similar ambivalent attitude towards the second book of Virgil's Aeneid. Clearly aware that this poem combines a historical core with fiction, or otherwise put, presents a fictualization of facts, Augustine does quote it as a historical source and poetical model out of a strategic rhetorical and aesthetical motivation. Second, posterity. It is striking that De civitate Dei had a great impact from the start, an impact that is very diverse in terms of content and geography. The first reception, obviously, took place shortly after Augustine's death in his own North Africa, a deep and complex legacy. His African heirs, Cutfuldeus of Carthage, Fulgentius of Ruspe, and Primasius of Hadrumetum, quoted in varying degrees from De civitate Dei, especially in order to distill exegetical principles from it. The book crossed the Mediterranean Sea to Gaul. Gaul seemed to be a major center of the earliest reception of De civitate Dei, circulating in aristocratic friendship circles, as attested in the pre-Christian poem De Reditu Suo, composed by Rutilius, and Ruricius' epistolary request to Terentius for a copy of De civitate Dei. The influence of Paulinus of Nola in this perspective is not implausible. The work also circulated in monastic circles in the south of France, particularly within the Gallic concerns about Augustine's doctrine of grace and predestination, to mention only the Carmen de Providentia Dei of Faustus of Ries de Gratia. Remarkably, in the era of growing popularity of patristic argumentation, Gennadius of Marseille does omit De Civitate Dei in his reference handbook De Viris Illustribus, probably purposefully, situated at the background of the Massilian rejection of Augustine's anti-Pelagian doctrine, also present in this work, and likely also explained by the reservations Gennadius critically places upon the authority and centrality Augustine himself bestowed on his own De Civitate Dei. Our examination of this earliest reception of Augustine's De Civitate Dei proved to be an important test for the emergence of Augustine's authority, which was certainly not evident from these case studies from Africa and Gaul. And even in the Carolingian era, as certain margins show, not all books of De Civitate Dei were considered harmless. These case studies furthermore pointed to an original atomistic reception of the work. For a more comprehensive reception, for example in Gaul, we have to wait to Gregory of Tours. An unexpected source of legacy is late antique and early medieval sermons. Despite a difference in genre and target group compared to De Civitate Dei, the writers of sermon manuals and preachers found inspiration in De Civitate Dei, not only indirectly, but even through the collection of quotations. Paul the Deacon's homiliary and the homiliary of Fleury offer a special case study in this context. A fine example of homiletic recuperation is Book 22, 8-9, which deals with miracles attributed to Saint Stephen and was widely disseminated in sermons. Many thematic clusters have a long reception history. Just to name a few: theology of history, peregrination, two cities, sacrifice, human condition, ambivalence of the material world, grace, predestination, miracles, etc. An important, almost Gordian knot that binds together both the sources and the reception of De Civitate Dei is the concept of civitas. Hence my choice for this richly illuminated manuscript commissioned by Count Wolfert VI van Borselen, the husband of Queen Mary Stuart. Today it is kept in the University Library of Utrecht. We see Augustine showing the philosophers what the ideal state should look like. And according to art historians, the city of Bruges served as an artistic model for this perfect society. Though also a port city, I dare to doubt Augustine had the city of Bruges in mind when he reflected on the notion of civitas. Possible constitutive parameters of civitas, such as multitude, people, concord, natural law, or religion, distinguish its Ciceronian, Augustinian, Isidorian, and later medieval definitions as articulated by Remigius of Auxerre, Thomas Aquinas, or John Wycliffe. Inspired by the Bible, Augustine's mystical and eschatological rendering of civitas notably differs from Cicero's. In his so-called De Civibus, Isidore of Seville borrowed Augustine's definitions of populus and civitas and repurposed them by structurally removing Augustine's apologetic, exegetical, and mystical interpretations of that terminology, etymologically returning to Cicero. Subsequently, this Isidorian reading of De Civitate Dei provoked a thoroughly Augustinian hermeneutics of Isidore's own Etymologiae by Brolio of Saragossa and Rabanus Maurus. On a textual material level, the elaborate manuscript transmission of De Civitate Dei testifies to its impact on the intellectual history of the West. This leads us to the following boxing round: philological research, textual transmission. This magnificently illuminated manuscript of De Civitate Dei, depicting Augustine at his desk, takes us to the second round, the text of De Civitate Dei and its extremely challenging transmission history. De Civitate Dei's extensive manuscript transmission has never been studied in a systematic and comprehensive way. A consequence of this neglect is that our knowledge of the work's material circulation is both limited and imprecise, and that its critical additions are based on methodologically unsound foundations. That the Dombar Kolb edition needs to be re-examined is confirmed by meticulously analyzing the convoluted early transmission history of the contamination-prone 13th book of De Civitate Dei. Over the past few days, we have worked hard to better understand its earliest textual circulation. At the outset of our conference, Dr. Gianni lucidly mapped the 4 challenges of studying the transmission history of De Civitate Dei: the possibility of authorial variants, the length of De Civitate Dei, its breadth, a census of 715 items, 430 units, contaminations from the very beginning. Book 18, the longest and most encyclopedic one, serves as an interesting case study of the challenge of the length for studying the content and the transmission of Augustine's magnum opus. The 9th century manuscript Condom Bibliothèque 75 and the related Cambrai Bibliothèque Municipale 350 clearly exemplify the last 2 challenges. An analysis of the correction campaign they underwent illustrates the possible insufficiency of paratext, the pervasiveness of the contamination process, and the complexity of a mobile antigraph. The breadth is not only constituted by direct witnesses, but also by indirect ones. For instance, the Florilegium Expositum in Heptatorchum by John the Deacon offers a fascinating view on a high-quality 6th century testimony of De Civitate Dei. De Civitate Dei clearly was Isidore's most favorite source, quoted in almost all of his works, substantiating he had all 22 books at his disposal. Putting his Chronica, De Differentiis Verbis, De Natura Rerum, and other treatises of his oeuvre under the microscope unveils previously unseen borrowings of De Civitate Dei by this Visigothic archbishop. The 12th century Tournesian manuscript KBR 2005 serves as a unique case study of the material transmission of the 2 or 3 volumes of that edition of De Civitate Dei, as it raises questions how it was written, bound and catalogued in that specific Benedictine milieu. Over the past few days, it has become clear that the importance of marginalia in the study of De Civitate Dei should not be underestimated. Every contribution in the session on manuscript transmission highlighted this. Across the sessions, we noticed in this regard a strong Castiaco-Gianni-Colombi alliance, which I, by the way, would advise to not abbreviate as KGC, as this is an acronym for Kentucky Grilled Chicken. Marginal annotations to Book 18, for instance, can hint at genealogical relations between manuscripts. Furthermore, quantitative research of early medieval annotations to De Civitate Dei reveals which specific books were most popular in certain periods and changes in interest from late antiquity to the Carolingian period, as is the case for the fascination for certain aspects of the Roman past and pre-Christian religion. Moreover, some margins were specifically intended to hermeneutically channel the interpretation of specific passages, for instance, by Carolingian scholars about the issue of double predestination. One conclusion is obvious. There is still an immense amount of editorial work ahead of us, but it promises to be very exciting and has the potential for many new discoveries. Without wanting to reopen the discussion whether in Book 13 death is a punishment for sin, the sin, or for sinners, a typical conference dinner discussion, preferably after a good glass of wine, it's obvious that the importance of a good text critical edition is not an abstract objective in itself. Form and content are mutually connected. The bell rings for our final boxing round. Content. An anonymous Spanish sculptor was able to depict appropriately that in Augustine's case, political theory and practice imply each other. In his right hand, Augustine balances both his De civitate Dei and his city of God. At the same time, you can see what a patristic scholar does during a romantic outing with his wife in Amsterdam. We thus started the third round of our boxing championship, De civitate Dei's content, in particular politics. Robert Marcus, in his classic Saeculum, History and Society in the Theology of Augustine, observed that despite its length and tediousness, De civitate Dei is Augustine's most carefully planned piece of work. On what exactly that plan looks like and the exact chronology of the subsequent books, scholars have spent gallons of ink. Questions also revisited the past days here. The same Robert Marcus wrote that in Augustine we find no explicitly stated political theory, only platitudes or asides, rarely at the center of his interest, rather implications of what he has to say about other related matters. Notwithstanding Marcus' sharp observation, generations of scholars have read this work in search of an Augustinian political theory. Also in this regard, our conference made crucial observations. Ever since US President Joe Biden quoted De civitate Dei 1924, a populace is defined by the common love object pursued by its members, in his inaugural address, nobody has questioned the topicality of De civitate Dei. Augustine certainly would agree with Biden's call for peace and stability, but perhaps less so with his plea for the ideals of the American dream. Augustine would especially regret the fact that Biden took his quote out of its original context and secularized it. With Augustine, the heavenly city is central, and the earthly city, to which Biden limited himself, is ordered by its heavenly purpose. Moreover, while Book 19 traditionally is considered as the capstone of Augustine's political thinking, we have clearly established it should be understood as Augustine's blueprint of a vita socialis. Civitas is first social, only subsequently is it political in Augustine's mindset. The democratic potentiality of the set definition of populus in Book 1924 entails a Christian sociology of Roman religion, Roman social relations, the Hebrew and Christian religion. In short, a sociology of the civic will, prioritizing concordia above disciplina. In the 1930s, during the rise of totalitarian regimes, the British cultural historian Christopher Dawson already noted how Augustine's De civitate Dei stimulated moral freedom and ethical responsibility, especially by stripping the political state of its divine halo and grounding the principle of social life in human will. In a recent essay, Veronica Ogle argued that by pointing out the limitations of the earthly world and pleading for order in our society, Augustine does not call on us to flee the world, but rather to order our earthly existence, to obediently work together towards unity from a balanced understanding of goodness, and all of this is to be done in the light of God's love. This holistic reading of De Civitate Dei, centered on the Ordo Amoris, could underpin the intuition that libido dominandi is not merely a political or social vice, but by definition a moral deficiency. However, as you all know very well, the Civitate Dei has not only been consulted as a political handbook on citizenship, it has also been scrutinized as a historical source of the Roman Empire, an encyclopedia of Roman philosophical and religious systems, a philosophical consideration of human virtue and vice, a theological treatise on eschatology. Books 15 to 18 deal with the problem of human communication, in particular as expressed in theological and pastoral issues concerning different Bible translations. Though Augustine considers the Septuagint not only as an originally accurate translation of the Hebrew Bible, but also as solely authoritative, he nevertheless is aware of different translations. He reflected about the existence of different versions as being equally scripture by using polysemy. Book 22, in tandem with Sermo 259, can be considered the climax of his philosophy on time. Inspired by the Bible and liturgy, via an eschatological calculus, time and rest are mutually linked, and the earthly Sabbath is transformed in an eternal Sabbath. The time-bound Requiem sine fine culminates in a timeless Requiem sempiterna. The sun no longer sets. Neglecting the present time as transitory is one of the four strategies of self-confident immunization the notion of civitas celestis results in. Together with an universalistic, predestinarian, and comprehensively redemptive worldview, membership of the Ecclesia Peregrinans offers humanity by relativizing this worldly life, though in the end, nobody is sure to belong to this civitas Dei. Hence, any triumphant mentality of superiority should be suppressed, taking humility as default position. A common thread throughout several lectures was Augustine's thinking on the distinction between literal and figurative exegesis and its prophetic and sacramental understanding of history. I hope our championship did not take too much of your strength. However, the result is not to be underestimated. We have truly seen every corner and side of the boxing ring. Over the last 3 days, we have scrutinized and extensively discussed very interesting aspects of the Civitate Dei's content, the text, its sources, and reception. Meticulously formulated both old and completely new questions, deeply reflected upon future methodologies, and taken important steps forward on the one hand, and marked out areas for new research on the other. Now that the end of our boxing match is in sight, we would like to briefly discuss some concrete logistics. We are pleased to announce that we will be submitting the proceedings of this conference to the prestigious Brill series Augustinus Werke und Wirkung. The deadline for papers made in conformity with the style sheet of the said series, and guidelines will follow, is September the 1st, 2022. And dear colleagues, to further our boxing metaphor, this is a knockout deadline. The exhausting match has been fought. Augustine can triumphantly put his hands in the air. For the applause, we travel to his North Africa. A famous mosaic kept in the Algerian Tipasa Museum expresses the following wish, which could almost be a quotation from De Civitate Dei. In Deo pax et concordia sit convivio nostro. That the past few days have been characterized by scholarly pax, by academic concordia, and that it has even been a true Augustinian convivium. Unfortunately, not in the literal culinary sense. We'll save that for the next time you come to Leuven. But a collegial gathering and an intellectual feast is something we owe to all of you, participants, presenters, chairs, and colleagues alike. Marina, Gert, and I would like to express our gratitude for all the erudite lectures, pertinent questions, and interesting discussions. We are grateful that the colleagues with whom we initiated this project, Jeroen de Keyser and Andrea Rubilio, offered us the occasion and support to organize this conference. Last, but definitely not least, Gert and I would like to thank in particularly Dr. Gianni, Marina, for a flawless, enthusiastic, and intellectually stimulating organization of this conference. To you all, Pax and Concordia, with the explicit hope that in the post-COVID era, we can work towards a real convivium. Take care and see you soon. Thank you.